rural sector, rural economy. Paranjoy is a first-rate financial journalist besides all his other talents. I cannot claim to having specialized in any one area, least of all higher education. So I took the subject given to me in a very textual and literal fashion, which is the assault on reason and higher education. So of course I am going to talk of higher education too, but it seems to me that I would do injustice to the topic and to all of you and to everybody who is wondering what is happening in India today, what is this government all about, if I were to neglect what I believe is the ongoing assault on reason. Now, looking at the average age of the audience here, I'm guessing many of us don't have a fair idea, don't have first-hand experience of what the emergency was like. I certainly have learned whatever I did about the emergency from books, journalism, talking to people who were around at that time. And I have no doubt that what happened then was pretty awful. I have some experience with the way governments have behaved after the emergency. And I can say with some degree of authority that while all of those governments, without fail, have done a lot of terrible things, and I'm referring now to the post-emergency period, never, to my mind, have we seen since the emergency a government which is more wedded to unreason, to irrationality, to intolerance, to secrecy, and to Philistinism than the current government being run by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now, this may seem like a very harsh statement. My friend Dr. Ram Guha made a statement about a month or two ago where he used harsh language, and of course he was trolled mercilessly on social media, so I expect the same to happen, and I'll be disappointed if it doesn't. But I do feel some obligation, an obligation to justify this very harsh judgment that I am passing on the nature of the present government. So what I propose to do in the half an hour or so that I have is to talk you through, to present a sort of a taxonomy of sorts of all the different ways in which reason, rationality, good sense, constitutional values have come under assault, sustained assault, in field after field. And as I was preparing the list as part of my work for this talk, I realized that this is very depressing stuff. It is. But unless we are able to speak honestly and frankly and call a spade, I don't think we will be able to deal with the kind of challenges that people across this country are confronting, nor will we be able to prepare ourselves for the even greater challenges which are, to my mind, almost with certainty, already underway. The government in many ways began its life on the basis of irrationality or by upturning commonly held beliefs and values. When the Prime Minister spoke or described his victory and his coming to office as a triumph in historical terms, and he slipped in a number which many people may not have realized the significance of when he said India has been through 800 years of slavery. Now, those of us who have been through our education system and who understand the nature of Indian history and the kind of damage that British colonialism and imperialism did to the subcontinent would immediately challenge this idea of 800 years of slavery. But the purpose of this number was not to enter into a debate about how good or bad certain rulers of India were, but to lay out in a very subtle manner the idea that the arrival of a BJP majority government is one way with which the Sangh Parivar hopes to erase these 800 years, 600 years of which consist of a time when India was ruled by Indians, of course of a different religion. They spoke different languages, or a different language from what the Sangh Parivar considers an Indian language. So there was a clear message being sent out about who belongs, who doesn't belong, what is Indian, what is not Indian. And it was clear from the outset that notwithstanding all the promises made in the election, and you know the slogans, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Saath, notwithstanding all of that, there was going to be a subtext in virtually everything that the government is going to do, and what the government perhaps, or the government's top leaders are going to be unable to do openly. There would be a signal was being sent to all the different organizations of the Sangh Parivar that operate in the shadows, that don't worry about the slogans on the basis of which we got elected. You will have your time in the sun. Your time in the sun has come now. And we do not expect you to give up your agenda. Instead, we expect you to pursue it. Where possible, we will facilitate this agenda. If that is not possible, we will turn a blind eye. But no interference will be placed on this agenda, which was kept hidden from the voters of India in the election. So from day one, in a way, the Prime Minister was proclaiming something. There was a subliminal message which passed by most Indians who said, 200 years, 300 years, 800 years of slavery doesn't really matter. People didn't do the math. But the message went through to those who understood. I don't need to recount some of the other fantasies and irrational statements which came from the Prime Minister himself. The idea of plastic surgery, or the idea, well, plastic surgery, in fairness to Indian medical science, India is one of those societies which dabbled in all kinds of medical practices, and there was indeed the rudiments of surgery to repair noses and ears damaged in conflict and war. But to go from that to claim that the head of Ganesh was the result of plastic surgery, and the Prime Minister could say this in a hall full of doctors, and such was the command that he exercised that you didn't even hear nervous laughter from among all the doctors who knew better. Well, this government's assault on history became manifest several months later in a different way, when out of the blue, and despite the same Modi government in Parliament answering questions, because there was always an effort to change the name of Aurangzeb Road in Delhi, to get rid of the name of this hated ruler. And every time a question was asked in Parliament, the Modi government's own ministry was constrained to give an answer under law, that as per the Government of India's long settled policy, the names of roads in Delhi after historical personalities cannot be changed. Despite that, you have this attempt. Now, this is not a place to go into a debate about the place of Aurangzeb or what he did or didn't do. But the history of every country has vast shades of grey, and Aurangzeb is one of those rulers who did all kinds of awful things. But as they say, show me one ruler who didn't, and you'll be lucky. But it's a question of what are the crimes that you count. So this government was in a way saying that crimes committed by kings and queens in the past against peasants who were exploited and overtaxed, overburdened, against women who were denied education, who were denied basic rights for millennia. All of this was under the watchful protection of kings that we venerate today. Sati took place under the rule of kings that we venerate. Dalits were oppressed under the watchful eye of kings that we venerate. But there is no agitation to get rid of those street names. Again, a signal being sent by the government, by the BJP, in erasing the name of Aurangzeb from the road in Delhi. And of course, the ultimate irony of a party and a government that can talk of 800 years of slavery, that when it came to the demand for the Kohinoor diamond to be returned to India, you could have the Solicitor General say in court, and now they can deny that, well, we didn't instruct him. Anybody who knows how government works, and you are the best example here, knows that such things don't happen in an accidental sort of way. For the Solicitor General of India to argue in the Supreme Court that the Kohinoor diamond was not stolen, was not the result of conquest, but was a gift, tells you how contingent the BJP's approach towards matters of historical injustice are. If you want to use history as a whipping boy against the minorities, then you can find any number of easy targets and rake up any number of historical debates or diversions. But if you want to cozy up to British capital, if you want to cozy up to the British government, if you want to appear reasonable on the world stage, then historical issues which may inconvenience you are conveniently buried. And all of this is the hallmark of, as I said, this assault on reason, which is a central driving force of this government. Turning to broader issues of culture, if I were to recount, we know the kind of people that have been put onto the censor board. We know the kind of person who was put in charge of the FTII, the Film and Television Institute of India. That is, of course, a subject to be discussed on the question of higher education, but it is also an assault on culture. India produces the highest number of films in the world. India and I believe Korea are the only two countries in the world where indigenously produced movies account for more than half of the revenue earned by films exhibited across the country. Every other country in the world is dominated by films produced from outside. And you want to undermine by putting unqualified people, you want to undermine the premier institution in this country which is training the next generation of film directors, film technicians and others. Where's the logic in that? Recently, the Culture Minister of India made a statement that under the premiership of Narendra Modi, new life and energy has been breathed into India's cultural institutions. I couldn't find a more, I don't think this government can make a more astonishing claim than that. The Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, which was, everybody concedes, was being run in a professional manner to high academic standards, not partisan at all in terms of the kind of subjects that were being discussed in weekly seminars. The previous director had broadened the ambit of NMML to involve scholars who are not working in English, to include traditions or different disciplines that never got an airing in the past. Fine, you want to remove that person, do it. But it remains headless. Yet another cultural institution handed over to the tender loving care of, again with due apologies sir, IAS officers who are excellent administrators, but most of whom regard postings to cultural institutions as the bureaucratic equivalent of Kala Pani. What's the fate of National Museum or the National Archives or the Nehru Memorial Library going to be when you put people in charge of these who are anxiously waiting for what they consider to be a more responsible, a more powerful posting? So even though this government is driven by this irrational desire to remove people who are doing a competent job running various institutions, the earlier director of the National Museum was also unceremoniously booted out. Some bureaucratic reason was found to remove him. So you're quite happy to do that, but you lack the resources from within your own parivar to put competent, qualified people to run these institutions, and you fall back on a disinterested and pliant bureaucracy, and you can well imagine what the fate of these cultural institutions of India are going to be in circumstances like this. For the Culture Minister of India to claim that new life is being, that cultural institutions in India are being energized is laughable. You see the fate of the different academies, the attitude of these academies towards the creme de la creme of Indian writers who chose a way to protest against what they saw as the government's unwillingness to deal with violence and communalism by returning their awards. They were upset at the failure of the academy to condemn the killing of writers, members of the academy like Kalburgi. This is not the hallmark of, or the reaction of these academies and what's happened since is not the hallmark of a government which has energized cultural institutions, far from it. But it is when we evaluate the attitude of the ruling party and the government towards minorities, and in particular Muslims, that you see the real face of unreason and irrationality appear before you. And here you can see that the Prime Minister says one thing. So in his Red Fort speech in August 2014, a few months after he became PM, he went through the motions of condemning or criticizing communalism, and he asked for a moratorium on those who are engaging in divisive politics. Now, it was strange that he used the word moratorium, What was even stranger to my mind was that he put a time limit. He said, by 10 saal ke liye moratorium hona chahiye. Why 10 years? He's never given a press conference, so nobody's ever had a chance to ask him that question. Be that as it may, well, within weeks of that 10-year moratorium being announced, we saw members of the Sangh Parivar, members of the RSS family, the same family to which the Prime Minister swears allegiance, engaging in the most communal, divisive propaganda campaigns aimed at engendering fear among ordinary Hindus by this slogan of love jihad. And what is regrettable, and perhaps Sainath spoke about this yesterday, but the ease with which elements of the Sangh Parivar were able to mobilize sections of the mass media in doing highly irresponsible, false, defamatory, inflammatory stories about the existence of some kind of a mythical, grandiose conspiracy involving lakhs and lakhs of handsome Muslim boys whose sole purpose in life, on the basis of an organized jihadi plot, is to seduce and convert Hindu women as part of some kind of a crazy long-term plot to turn India into an Islamic state. Any rational society would laugh at this kind of fantasy. Any journalist or editor with half a brain would question any politician who makes these kinds of idiotic claims. Instead, we saw respectable channels in Hindi, in English, in Malayalam come up with fabricated stories aimed at suggesting that this plot was underway, and this marked, it's now a year and a half, so much other horrible things have happened that this looks like something in past history. But it was barely a year ago when Love Jihad was the top headline on many television channels. And lest you assume that Love Jihad, because when you ask a BJP minister that the PM says one thing, your manifesto says one thing, you say sabke saath, sabka haath, etc., sabka vikas. How can you indulge in this kind of communal propaganda? They say, well, this is not us, this is some individual chap, but you have a cover story in Organizer and Panchajanya, which are the closest things that you have to the organs of the RSS, you have an entire issue devoted to this myth of love jihad. And that makes it very clear how organized and systematic the campaign to divide Hindus and Muslims was. And for senior ministers and the Prime Minister of this country and others to constantly refer to the RSS as a patriotic organization that we support, that they do good work, for the Chief Minister of Maharashtra to turn up in uniform at an RSS event when the RSS does these kinds of things, tells you that in a way even the pretense of plausible deniability is not something that they are bothered about. Love Jihad died a natural death after Cobra Post, a website, ran an expose, a sting operation where they were able to actually record BJP and RSS functionaries in Uttar Pradesh admitting on camera to how they are fabricating these plots in order to further their politics. Well, Love Jihad died a natural death. What else can you do to divide people? The BJP and RSS came up with their cow politics. The state of Haryana, for the last 40 years, 45 years, 50 years, has had in place a ban on cow slaughter, bull slaughter, the sale of beef in any form. There was an undivided Punjab law which was applicable in Haryana and has been the law in Haryana from 61 or 62 until the present time. But in order to rake this issue up, the Manohar Lal Khattar government decides to pass a new law. I suppose they took a leaf out of the Maharashtra government's, one of its earliest decisions. So the Haryana government passes a new law which differs from the old only in terms of the sentencing that is involved for crimes committed under the law. The only additional ban that the new law introduces is for if you bring canned, tinned beef into the state. That's it. But they presented this as a great accomplishment of the BJP and RSS, protection of cows, and you had the Haryana Chief Minister say कि मुसलमान मुसलमान रहे लेकिन हिंदुस्तान में बीफ खाना छोड़ दे. Who is he? Who is the Chief Minister of Haryana to say who can live and who can't live in this country and under what circumstances they must live? Yet, this kind of an awful, atrocious, communal, divisive, unconstitutional statement by a constitutional functionary who has taken an oath to serve the people of India without discrimination, without favor, passes unremarked. I can understand the Prime Minister wanting to ignore what Manohar Lal Khattar said. But other than one or two newspapers which reported this, people chose to forget about it. People chose to ignore or to ask, how can a CM talk like this? Is this the language that a Chief Minister ought to be using? When beef politics ran its course and in many ways has begun to invite a backlash, because we are now seeing stories from Maharashtra where the Kolhapuri chappal manufacturers are saying we are facing a crisis because of the Maharashtra government's beef ban. Farmers across the country are finding it difficult to maintain old cows and bulls, and the government is not the same government which talks a great deal about protecting cattle, is nowhere on the scene to help them. But this issue continues. It's used by vigilantes, the killing of Mohammad Akhlaq in Dadri, the lynching of 2 people including a young boy in Jharkhand. And what's the response when these crimes are committed? And here again I want to come back to this idea of assault on reason. Because friends, even by the conventional yardstick of cynical politics, right? Even by the conventional yardstick of cynical politics, after Mohammad Akhlaq was lynched in Dadri, Prime Minister was outside the country at the time. He was in fact in the US, where a few days before that or a few weeks before that, a Muslim boy in Texas had been arrested because he took an alarm clock to school. They thought this was a bomb. The kid was handcuffed. Now those of you who know constitutional structures in the US and India, you know that law and order is a state subject in the US. Despite that, Obama, as a clever politician, decided to invite this kid to the White House, apologized to him as the President of the US, created a great photo opportunity. Rational, if Narendra Modi were a rational politician, he would have come back to India and said, well, I know that the RSS guys, Bajrang Dal guys, or various other elements of the Sangh Parivar were involved in this incident, but Akhlaq's son is an Air Force officer. What would it hurt? What would it cost me to go and visit the family? It would have cost him nothing. It would have robbed people like us of arguments to show how insensitive he and his government can be. But, and it would have cost at best, it would have irritated some hardline elements in the Sangh Parivar who have no option but to continue supporting Modi anyway. But even the impulses of a rational politician that would operate in such a case, and politicians do this all the time. A tragedy happens, they go visiting the house of the deceased person, they announce solatium, they do all these kinds of things. Even that the Prime Minister was unable to summon himself to do. And to my mind, it wasn't, more than the killing or more than what happened in Dadri, because incidents can happen in any situation. It's the response of those in authority after an event, which is what tells you a lot about the nature of that person, the nature of their politics, the nature of their moral universe. So whether Rajiv Gandhi was responsible for, whether we can prove in a court of law, whether Rajiv Gandhi was responsible for the massacre of Sikhs in November 84, is something that is a question that still has to be settled, whether in a court of law you could prove it. But I, as an analyst, as a journalist, infer his guilt from the statement he made after, when he said, when a big tree falls, the earth is bound to shake. I infer his guilt from his unwillingness to punish members of the Congress party or other people or the police officers who were involved in the genocide of Sikhs in November 84. Similarly, whether in 2002 in Gujarat or Dadri or Jharkhand, we can learn a lot from the post-killing response of those who are in power. When the Chief Minister of Jharkhand's response to the lynching of 2 people, including a kid, is to say, well, it is illegal to take cows out of the state. If that is the response of a Chief Minister, you wonder what moral universe do these people occupy? What's their conception of rationality? What's their conception of reason? And to my mind, this inability to even perform in the normal cynical way of politicians who we know and hate in this country, right, who do all kinds of, make fake promises and do all kinds of things, their inability to even do that much, to go through the motions, to my mind tells me a lot about the kind of danger which their agenda is suffused with for the rest of this country, for ordinary people. With love jihad petering out, with beef politics taking its own course, now of course they've come up with the non-issue of Bharat Mata, and we see now politician after politician making this into a big issue. New kinds of loyalty tests are being prescribed, new forms of vulnerability for Indians of all kinds are being created, and this isn't what a party or a government that is committed to Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, that the Prime Minister says that I forget at which conference, he said that my only agenda is Vikas, 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 Vikas. Well, where does all this fit? What is the role of concocting new tests of loyalty at a time when all kinds of serious economic problems confront the ordinary masses of this country, when they have expectations from you for creating jobs, for pushing growth up to a certain rate? But there is a method in this madness. This list of terrible things that I'm recounting before you, it all does add up to something. There is logic to it. But what that is something which is very unpleasant. But coming back to the issue of minorities, we've had bad ministers, we've had ministers who've said rubbish in the past, who've said terrible things. But to find in one council of ministers no less than 5 individuals who in the space of the last year and a half have said blatantly communal things is in many ways unprecedented. Sadhvi Niranjan Jyoti's famous remark of Ramzade or Haramzade. I mean, I'm not a religious person, but I wonder how a religious person can even think of this kind of an equation. That was the only time, because it was such an outrageous comment made at a politically sensitive time when Delhi was going to elections. This was the only time that the Prime Minister chose to make a statement criticizing one of these people who engaged in hate speech. Otherwise, Mahesh Sharma's remark passed unnoticed. What did he say in a television interview? This is the man who claimed he was paying tribute to APJ Abdul Kalam by renaming Aurangzeb Road after him. And he says in an interview that Abdul Kalam Musliman hote hue bhi itne bade deshbhakt the. How can a minister talk like this? How can a minister talk like this and keep his job? How can a minister talk like this, keep his job and get as a reward the right to move into the house of APJ Abdul Kalam, the man who he just insulted? And you insult him and you insult all the Muslims of India. In any democracy, in any civil society or political system wedded to rationality and reason, such people won't even last more than a few hours after they make this kind of statement. With a ministerial berth. And he has continued to say all kinds of funny things one after the other. His most recent remark being that if Hindus don't produce two sons, then there is a danger that हमारी बेटियां सबको बुर्का पहनना पड़ेगा पाकिस्तान की तरह. So again you have, and then you have Ram Shankar Katheria, another minister who in Agra at a public rally warned the police that if you continue to take action against BJP and RSS members for having taken the law into their own hands, Holi would be red in color. And when he was asked, what do you mean by this statement? He said, I was only saying that the Hindu community should unite for their safety. Now, how can a minister who takes an oath on the constitution talk about Hindus uniting for their safety? If he wants to unite people for their safety, it should be the people of Agra. It should be the people of India. For a minister to posit the necessity for Hindus to unite for their safety, well, against whom? Obviously against those who are not Hindus. Yet, and bear in mind that this is a statement he makes by way of an explanation when he's confronted with other equally terrible statements. Again, the media lets this go. Narendra Modi lets this go. There is no discussion on this. Sanjeev Balyan, another minister. We have 5 of these people who have said, who are repeat offenders when it comes to making communal statements. And I, for the life of me, if I can think of precedents in the last 25, 30 years, or even the last 70 years in India, where a council of ministers has had such an amazing collection of politicians who say these kinds of things and keep their jobs, and everybody's unapologetic about it. The Prime Minister feels no need, he feels no obligation, forget to sack, but even to contradict, or even to explain, or even to reassure the people of this country that these guys don't speak for me, they don't speak for my government. You hear nothing. And as I said, journalists, editors, those who ought to have the chance to put these questions to the Prime Minister on the record never have this kind of opportunity. So you're dealing with a government that has given open season to all kinds of unsavory elements to propagate hate, to propagate divisiveness, to engage in communal hate-mongering of the worst kind, and who close off all doors of accountability by making sure that no one is in a position to question them. When it comes to this government and Dalits, and here I want to focus a little on higher education. The first inkling we had that notwithstanding all the attempts to appropriate Ambedkar and turn him into some kind of a Sangh Parivar icon, the first indication we had of this government's inability to deal with Ambedkar's views, thoughts and contribution, and the politics of those who regard Ambedkar as an icon for their struggles today, was in the IIT Madras, when we saw an extraordinary sequence of events unfold following the issuing of a pamphlet by the Ambedkar Periyar Study Circle. Now what's amazing is that the APSC issued a leaflet where they quote, which was essentially an extract from the Riddles of Hinduism. A published work, published after his death, but a authentic work of Ambedkar, the man whom the BJP now says is part of its pantheon. And of course we're dealing with political illiteracy on such a mass scale that the IIT administration and the HRD ministry to whom this pamphlet was referred regarded this pamphlet, which contained nothing but what Ambedkar wrote, to be something that is targeting a community, it's inflammatory, it's illegal, it's unconstitutional. I don't think they used the word seditious at that instance, but the net result was that this student body found itself peremptorily banned. Well, a struggle ensued. People protested from across India and around the world in defense of the Ambedkar Periyar Study Circle, and finally IIT Madras was forced to rescind that. But clearly a lesson had not been learned by the HRD bureaucracy, by the HRD ministry, by the HRD minister. Because what unfolded subsequently at Hyderabad Central University, all of you live in the city, you know the details well, I don't need to revisit that. But essentially playing fast and loose with the careers and future of bright young men and women who wanted nothing other than natural justice to prevail. And when you shut off all avenues of justice, particularly when you are being leaned on by ministers, by the central education minister and ministry, well, we saw the tragic consequences, what people in HCU and across India are calling the institutional killing of Rohit Vemula. What has followed since then, though, is something which, to my mind, was equally astonishing, bizarre, because you had the education minister, I believe even Sushma Swaraj and others, then engaging in a debate as to whether Rohit Vemula is actually a Dalit or not. And you have the most patronizing language being used in parliament about my child and he is a child and so on and so forth, side by side with this attempt to question or to rob him of an identity which he chose for himself, which was his by birth, which this society, this history, this country placed on him. And now we are expected to believe that politicians who do this, the party that does this, are great followers of Ambedkar, that Ambedkar is part of the political philosophy and the foundation of so-called Hindutva politics. I think nothing could be a bigger shame than that. The assault on culture, the assault on minorities, the assault on Dalits, there's perhaps no section of the population which has not been the victim of this government's unreason in one way or the other. Recently we saw the blatant defiance in Maharashtra in the face of the High Court declaring that Shani Shingnapur shrine has to be opened to women as well as men. We saw extreme reluctance of the state government to implement this order. We saw violence being used against these courageous women who are asserting their right to pray. and no outrage from the national leadership in fact, the national leadership of the BJP keeping well off this issue. They know that they cannot openly come out against the demands of the women, but they knew that we have to ensure in one way or the other, because they cannot alienate the extreme, the obscurantist section, which is the natural constituency of Hindutva politics. Even people with disabilities have not been spared the irrational approach of this government. We had the absurd and shocking spectacle of Minister for Social Justice and Empowerment questioning whether people with disabilities are fit to work. A statement that she promptly retracted or said she was misquoted, but the record of that is out there in front of you. Equally bizarre and insensitive, this government is insisting on creating new terminology. So in Narendra Modi's Man Ki Baat, he declared one day that people with disabilities or disabled people should be called Divyang, because their status has been given to them by God. Like a very bizarre, in many ways, deeply problematic concept. But lo and behold now, despite the protest of disability rights activists who have said we do not want this term used, in government documents we recently saw in the rail budget, and I notice now that this word has invaded All India Radio and Doordarshan, where disabled people are regularly and routinely now referred to as Divyang. This is, to my mind, as insulting to disabled people as if somebody were to insist that the word Harijan should be used. At the end of the day, this is a section that says we do not want this term used to describe us. There is no major disability rights organization that approves of this term Divyang, yet this government, I don't know on the basis of what peculiar Sanskritist or religious or irrational conception, insists on pushing this word down their throat. We've also seen this government, when it comes to the broader question of rights and constitutional values, open assault on reason and rationality. I don't know how many of you have been following the debate on the Ishrat Jahan fake encounter. This isn't the place or the time for me to get into the nitty-gritty details of that case. But endless amounts of time are being devoted with government encouragement to debate whether Ishrat Jahan was this or that, whether Headley mentioned her or not, whether she is Lashkar-e-Taiba or not. When the simple fact is, and this has been said repeatedly by the Supreme Court of India, by various high courts, by the National Human Rights Commission of this country, that even a terrorist cannot be deprived of his or her life without due process of law. Something so simple to understand, something so non-controversial, a principle in whose respect lies the security of every citizen, because tomorrow if we relax our vigilance on the question of due process, and standing here in Hyderabad and looking at the history of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, you don't need me to tell you what impunity, giving police impunity, can mean for the rights of the masses of people. But we find blatant disregard for constitutional requirements of due process just being casually brushed aside, as if it doesn't matter. As if once you say somebody's a terrorist, then anything is fair game. This is the same mentality which then justifies the lynching of somebody in Jharkhand because it is illegal to export cattle. This is the same mentality which tries to justify the killing of Muhammad Akhlaq by saying, well, the meat should be sent for testing before we pass judgment on whether what took place was a lynching or not. And it upsets me as a journalist, and again I'm sure this figured in the discussions yesterday, that the media, and this is part of how the irrationality and unreason which governs us has infected every aspect of civil society, including the media today, where vast sections of the media are complicit in this kind of a discussion, as if somebody is a terrorist, it's fine, we have remained passive witnesses, mute spectators to senior police officers, junior police officers, a whole bunch of them who were in jail accused of killing Ishrat Jahan or Sohrabuddin. Or let's set aside these two. So the government says Ishrat Jahan is a terrorist, Sohrabuddin was a terrorist or a gangster. Well, there was a woman called Kausar B, who is the wife of Sohrabuddin, who was also abducted and killed illegally. What doctrine of necessity, what higher principle are you going to invoke to justify the rape and murder of a housewife? But these are questions and that nobody wants to discuss. Policemen accused of being involved in those crimes, having got bail, and everybody has the right to bail, so I'm not arguing about that. But to be reinstated in their positions, to be brought back into honorable positions. Today, the current DGP of Gujarat is a man who was an accused in a murder case. The president of the BJP, who was also an accused in the Sohrabuddin and Tulsiram Prajapati case, arguably for the first time before a murder trial even begins, a special CBI court discharges him. Now, courts may do all kinds of things, but the prosecuting agency, the CBI, which we are told today is independent. Gone are the days of the caged parrot, we are told, when the CBI did the bidding of its political masters. Well, the same CBI, the so-called independent CBI, did not see it fit to appeal the discharge of a murder accused before the trial even begins. And we are expected to believe that politics plays no role in this. And as I said, such is the degree to which irrationality and unreason has infected even the media, that I didn't see any angry studio discussions about the failure of the CBI to even go on appeal in that case. So we are essentially in a very, very dangerous zone in terms of public policy, political reasoning, and the capacity of civil society to see through all of this. And all of these negative trends came together in one lethal manner in the incident surrounding what happened in Jawaharlal Nehru University over the last 2 months. The assault on higher education, the assault on reason and rationality, the assault on the rule of law. You have speeches being made on campus. You have 400 plus universities in this country, loads of student organizations, and students being students say all kinds of things, a lot of which may not be agreeable, a lot of which may question government policy. Are we now going to start policing what kids say on campus in meetings of societies and clubs? Nivedita Menon, who is a respected political science professor, being trolled because of a speech she gives on campus. This is what we have reduced ourselves to. A nation of spy cams, a nation of doctored videos where footage of anything can be produced, twisted, distorted, and used to defame, but more than defame, to legally jeopardize the liberty and, alas, the life of an individual. Kanhaiya Kumar today, thanks to these doctored videos and the frenzy with which the media whipped up hate against him and against all students of JNU, I'm afraid will have to spend the next few years going wherever he does with some kind of security. University professors. We saw the horrible spectacle in Lucknow of a university professor who happened to like on Facebook, or perhaps he posted it. He posted an article by a Delhi University professor, Apurvanand, brilliant writer, columnist, on Umar Khalid, another one of the JNU students, who in the media fantasy land and in the propaganda of the BJP, because he had a Muslim name, they said, well, he must be Kashmiri, he must be anti-national. And he soon became, when it was realized that the case against Kanhaiya was rather weak, he soon became the mastermind and the most deadly person ever to emerge on an Indian university. And so when Apurvanand writes a piece, Umar Khalid, my son, and the professor in Lucknow University posts it on his Facebook page, you have the university try to suspend him, you have ABVP engaging in violence on campus, threatening this professor. Is this what we've come to? That Facebook posts, conversations we have in campuses, a conversation that Amir Khan has with his wife at home, where apprehensions are expressed by his wife about what is happening in this country, and he conveys this in a convivial atmosphere to a meeting in Delhi, the Goenka Awards function, becomes a subject for huge debate. People say how anti-national Amir Khan can be for making these kinds of statements, expressing fear and apprehension about the direction the country is going in. So have we reduced ourselves to this? That the media refuses to have debate and discussion. So there are no panel discussions. In Jammu and Kashmir, and I am also one of those who was appalled at the brutality of the Kashmir police in treating the non-Kashmiri students at NIT. And all of us were shocked when we saw the kind of lathi, the kind of bruises that the lathi charge on peaceful, unarmed students at NIT produced or generated. Shocking. And they were day after day of discussions on television channels about how terrible the Kashmir police was, and ruling party spokespersons were pilloried, rightly in my view, for this kind of excessive use of force. Well, where are the TV discussions on the killing, on the unjustified killing of 5 protesters in Kashmir over the last week or over the last 10 days? Where are the panel discussions on the manner in which the Malegaon case is being sabotaged because the terrorists who are accused of committing the crime happen to have uncomfortable affiliations? Where are the panel discussions? Where are the op-eds on the way in which the Samjhauta case, again a case which involves elements connected to the Hindutva groups, where are the panel discussions on this? So the media is not giving it to us. We can't have discussion on media. We can't have discussions on campus, clearly, because either we will be accused of being anti-national, or some vice-chancellor gets cold feet and does not want to burn his or her bridges with HRD ministry and decides to ban or not give permission for a certain meeting. So in Jamia Millia Islamia recently, a program was cancelled because the Vice-Chancellor felt that this is politically sensitive. In Jharkhand University, a former JNU professor, incidentally not somebody known to be left or radical, but I suppose he had a JNU affiliation, and in the eyes of the Vice-Chancellor of JNU, a Vice-Chancellor of the university in Jharkhand, that was deemed to be seditious enough. So this gentleman, this ex-professor, invited for a seminar and then promptly disinvited. So we can't discuss things on TV. We can't discuss things anymore very easily on campus. You never know when the police are going to, which vice-chancellor is going to allow the police to come and drag away students and professors the way it happened in Hyderabad. You have to be careful in other kinds of gatherings or groups what you talk about, because somebody may make a small video clip, edit 30 seconds, put it on YouTube, and next thing you know, you're being trolled for saying all kinds of, you're being accused of making anti-national or seditious comments. Even conversations between husband and wife, where one spouse expresses fear about what is happening in the country. If that conversation happens to be conveyed in an incorrect way to a wider audience, beware, watch out. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the product of the assault on reason, the assault on rationality, which has been the hallmark of the last 2 years of this government. As I said before, there have been governments in the past that have done this or that have tried to restrict the ambit of this right or that freedom, but in so sustained a manner, in so institutionalized a fashion, in so driven a way, leaving no channel, no stone unturned. I don't think, at least since the emergency, I have seen or experienced this kind of sustained assault. I did say, now of course this does raise the question of what this means about the future of higher education. Now this is happening at a time when cutbacks in the field of education are there before us. You don't need to be a statistician or an economist to understand that the kind of money which Arun Jaitley ji is apportioning to either the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan or the midday meal school program or higher education is simply not going to be enough to create the kind of quality education that this country needs. We saw in the net, non-net kind of debate increasing unwillingness of this government to allow scholars from poorer backgrounds to come, flourish, to learn, to think out of the box, to say or do unconventional things, to dream of unconventional careers, to come up with ideas that don't conform with what the government believes has to be done. So the assault on reason, the assault on higher education, to my mind, has to do, there is a political economy dimension to this. That you don't want to create, so this government was elected, we have in many ways got tired of listening to this theory, got elected on the basis of the aspirations of young people in this country. The aspirations for a better life, the aspirations for jobs. It's very clear that if you look at the vote percentage that the BJP got in 2014, that added boost of 10% had to do with the promises that were dangled in front of people. How do you, when you're not in a position to deliver on those promises, the data, all of you have seen the data of job creation in the last 5 years, even amidst supposedly 7% growth, which is really more like 3 or 4% or perhaps 5%, there are no jobs being created. Even if Make in India takes off tomorrow, Make in India is not going to create the kind of manufacturing jobs that millions and millions of young people in this country want and aspire to and have been promised. So what do you do then? If you are running this country and you got elected on the basis of promises that it is quite clear 18 months or 19 months into your tenure, you are not going to be in a position to fulfill. Well, you need to do something to temper people's expectations. And what better way to temper those expectations, what better way to make them think about other things than to attack reason, rationality, debate, throw scraps of divisive politics, divisive issues from time to time, diversionary issues from time to time, amongst people, amongst young people, and hope that one or two of these issues will ensnare people and make them forget what they elected a government to do in the first place. So yes, there is an assault on reason, there is an assault on rationality. But this is a very logical, well-planned, well-formulated assault on reason and rationality that we are confronting. There is a plan, there is a method in the madness. Don't for a minute imagine that there is confusion in the upper echelons of government. That why is it that Modi says Vikas, 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 and others are saying cow, 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 and others are saying love jihad, and others are saying Bharat Mata. These are all moving parts of the same machine. And this machine is a machine that is incapable of making in India the jobs, dreams and aspirations that people voted for in 2014. So when you ask yourself, when you confront the next example of unreason, and there will be many, believe me, between now and 2019, please be clear that this is all part of a plan. Thank you very much.